Shaka was not born into greatness, he earned it. His mother, Nandi, was a woman of strength and defiance. She bore Shaka out of wedlock with Senzangakona, a Zulu chief who would later reject them both. That rejection shaped Shaka's entire childhood. Laughed at, mocked by other children, called names like illegitimate and outcast, he grew up in exile, away from his father's people. But Shaka remembered everything. He watched, he listened, he burned silently. Even as a boy, he showed signs of leadership. While other children played, Shaka studied the movements of warriors, the tactics of hunters, the strategies of elders. He trained alone in the hills, hardened by hate, molded by hunger. By the time he joined the army of the Mthethwa chief Dingiswayo, he was already different. Brutally disciplined, fiercely intelligent, and unwilling to be average. In the military, Shaka introduced something new, something deadly. He replaced the long throwing spears with short stabbing ones designed for close combat. He taught warriors to form tight ranks, to fight as one, shield to shield, heart to heart. His methods were feared. His name was whispered. And when Chief Dingiswayo was killed by a rival, Shaka did not flinch. Instead, he took control. He claimed leadership of the Zulu clan not with inheritance, but with blood and strategy. From a boy once abandoned, he became the man no one could ignore. This was just the beginning. Shaka would not stop until the Zulu nation rose, united under one rule, one vision, one king. His name was no longer just Shaka. He had become the storm. With the death of Chief Dingiswayo, power shifted and chaos followed. But Shaka did not mourn. He moved. Quickly, he rallied the Zulu warriors, tightened their ranks, and faced the enemies who thought his rise would end with Dingiswayo. They were wrong. Shaka didn't just fight, he crushed. His new tactics shocked the region. Gone were the chaotic charges of old. In their place came precision, order, and terror. He formed the bullhorn formation, 2 flanks to encircle the enemy, a chest to hold the line, and reserves the loins to finish the job. No one had ever seen war like this. Village after village, clan after clan, Shaka conquered, not just with blood, but with brilliance. But he wasn't only feared on the battlefield. He was feared everywhere. Disloyalty? Death. Cowardice? Death. Disrespect? Death. His rule was absolute. Even allies tread carefully. But despite the fear, many followed him willingly. Why? Because Shaka offered protection, power, and unity in a land torn by tribal wars. Under him, the Zulu kingdom grew faster than any in the region's memory. He built a nation from fragments, from exiles and warriors, from fear and admiration. But the more he rose, the more enemies gathered. Shaka had declared himself king. Now, he would have to fight to stay. He built a nation from fragments, from exiles and warriors, from fear and admiration. But the more he rose, the more enemies gathered. Shaka had declared himself king. Now, he would have to fight to stay king. By now, the Zulu kingdom was more than just a name. It was a storm sweeping across southern Africa, a force of nature that reshaped everything in its path. Shaka had forged his warriors into something terrifying, something new. They were living, breathing weapons, and his battles weren't just clashes. They were brutal, calculated executions. But this meteoric rise, this explosion of power, brought attention. The dangerous kind. From the north, the Ndwandwe kingdom watched with growing alarm. Once the undisputed power, they now saw Shaka not as a rival, but as an existential threat, a cancer that had to be cut out before it spread. Their leader, Swide Kalenga, was a man as ruthless as he was ambitious, and he had one simple goal: crush Shaka Zulu and erase his kingdom from the map. The stage was set for a monumental clash of titans. The war that followed was savage. On paper, Swide had every advantage. He had more men, more resources, more everything. He commanded a massive, experienced army that had dominated the region for years. But Shaka had something Swide didn't: vision. He saw the battlefield not just as a flat piece of land, but as a chessboard, and he was a grandmaster of war. Instead of meeting Swide's overwhelming force head-on, which would have been suicide, Shaka played a different game. He turned the landscape itself into a weapon. He used scorched earth tactics, burning the grazing lands ahead of Swide's army, denying their cattle food and their soldiers sustenance. He used hit-and-run attacks, splitting his disciplined impis into smaller, silent groups that would strike with lightning speed and then melt back into the hills, leaving chaos and confusion in their wake. He controlled rivers, blocked food supplies, and turned Swide's massive numbers from an asset into a logistical nightmare. Every step Swide's army took into Zululand, they grew weaker, hungrier, and more demoralized. Shaka was making Swide's own strength his greatest weakness. The final devastating blow came at the Battle of Maladu's River. Swide, desperate for a decisive victory, pushed his exhausted army across the river, right into Shaka's trap. Shaka was waiting patiently, like a predator in the tall grass. He let half of Swide's army cross the river, splitting their forces, creating a point of no return. Then he struck. The attack was sudden, overwhelming, and utterly merciless. The Zulu Empire slammed into the divided and disoriented Ndwandwe army. The river, it said, ran red with blood. It was a complete and total annihilation. Swide himself barely escaped with his life, fleeing into the north, his once mighty kingdom left in smoldering ruins. Shaka didn't just win a battle, he erased his greatest rival from existence. But what Shaka did next was perhaps even more brilliant than the victory itself. Instead of slaughtering the survivors, he did something almost unheard of. He absorbed them. He offered the defeated Ndwandwe warriors and their families a place within his growing kingdom. He gave them food, protection, and a new identity as Zulus. This was the true genius of his empire building. His kingdom wasn't just built on war. It was built with people, forged from the ashes of the very tribes he had conquered. Each enemy defeated became new soldiers for his army. Each victory fueled the next one. This cycle of conquest and assimilation allowed his empire to grow at an explosive rate. Shaka's power was now absolute. He was undisputed, but all power has a cost. As his empire expanded, a darker side of Shaka began to emerge. The king grew more demanding, his rule harsher. A shadow of paranoia began to creep into his mind. He demanded a level of loyalty that bordered on terror. Whispers started in his inner circle, quiet doubts among the very men who had helped him rise. For now, though, the Zulu kingdom was an unstoppable machine, and at its heart was Shaka, once an outcast child, now revered and feared as a god of war. But the thing about gods who walk the earth is that even they can bleed. Have you ever heard of a king so powerful? He was called a god? A warrior who built an empire with his bare hands and a revolutionary spear. That was Shaka Zulu. He forged a nation from scattered tribes, creating one of the most formidable military forces in African history. His name was whispered with a mix of awe and terror. To his people, he was a protector, a unifier, a divine leader who brought them glory and strength. Power had made Shaka a god, but even gods can bleed. The problem with being a god is that people expect you to be perfect. But Shaka was human. The immense pressure of ruling, the constant threat of enemies, both inside and outside his kingdom, began to take its toll. The strong hand that had built the Zulu Empire started to tremble with paranoia. His rule, once seen as disciplined and visionary, began to feel like an iron fist, cold and unpredictable. The whispers started in the shadows of the royal kraal. Stories, perhaps exaggerated, perhaps not, began to circulate about his cruelty, his sudden, terrifying fits of rage. Was this the same leader who had united them? Or had power corrupted him, twisted him into something else entirely? The very warriors who once worshipped the ground he walked on began to fear him. Loyalty, once the bedrock of his kingdom, started to crack under the weight of suspicion. Shaka saw enemies everywhere. He trusted no one. His closest advisors, men who had fought beside him and celebrated his victories, now exchanged nervous glances and spoke in hushed tones when he wasn't around. The air in the palace grew thick with poison. Imagine living in that environment, where every word could be misconstrued, where a wrong look could mean your death. Even his own family, the people who should have been his staunchest allies, grew wary. The bonds of blood were fraying. And then came the ultimate betrayal, the kind that shatters dynasties. It wasn't an invading army or a foreign power that brought him down. The fatal blow came from within his own house. His half-brothers, Dingan and Malangana, had watched Shaka's rise with a toxic mix of jealousy and ambition. They saw his growing instability not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. They craved the throne, the power, the glory that Shaka held. They started to plot, finding willing ears among the many enemies Shaka had made during his brutal consolidation of power. Some of those enemies, the most dangerous ones, were his own blood. The end didn't come on a glorious battlefield, surrounded by the thunder of shields and the roar of his army. It was quiet, and it was pathetic. On a seemingly ordinary morning, Far from the theater of war where he had earned his legend, the betrayal struck. He was ambushed, cornered, not by 1,000 enemy soldiers, but by the men he once called brothers. They attacked him, and the great Shaka, the unstoppable force of nature, fell. His death sent a tremor through the empire he had built. The god king was dead, killed by his own kin. The kingdom was thrown into chaos. But here's the incredible thing about legends. They don't die easily. Shaka's physical reign ended in blood and shadow, a cautionary tale of power and paranoia. But his legacy? That was immortal. The Zulu kingdom, the nation he had forged in fire, did not crumble. It remained. His revolutionary military tactics, the horns of the buffalo formation, his short stabbing spear, these innovations were studied and admired for generations. His vision of a unified Zulu nation endured. His name, Shaka, lived on, echoing through history. It became a symbol of incredible strength, of brilliant strategy, but also a dark reminder of how absolute power can lead to absolute ruin. Shaka's story teaches us that even from pain, betrayal, and a tragic end, a legend can rise, forever changing the course of history. Shaka's body was buried in an unmarked grave, his name erased from the lips of the fearful, his memory silenced by the very brothers who shared his blood. But legends don't die quietly. Though Shaka's rule ended in betrayal, his legacy carved itself into the bones of southern Africa. After his death, Dingaan, the brother who took the throne, tried to undo what Shaka built. He removed Shaka's military systems, loosened his strict rules, and sought peace with foreign settlers. But peace came at a price. Without Shaka's iron hand, the kingdom grew vulnerable. The once invincible Zulu military began to weaken. Foreign powers, especially the British and Dutch, saw their opportunity. Over time, new kings rose, some noble, some weak, but none could match Shaka's fire. None could command a battlefield with silence. None could mold fear into loyalty like he did. And yet, Shaka was not perfect. He ruled with cruelty. He demanded loyalty that bled families dry. He destroyed as much as he built. But that's what makes his legacy so complex and unforgettable. Historians still debate, was he a tyrant, or a visionary, a warlord, or a king? One truth remains. Shaka changed Africa. He united over 100 clans into a single force, the Zulu nation. He rewrote the rules of tribal warfare. He created a kingdom out of nothing, and made the world take notice. Today, the Zulu people still remember him not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of strength, of power, of raw African genius. His methods are still studied, his strategies still admired, his story still told. Because Shaka Zulu was never just a man, he was a movement, a storm, a king, made of fire and iron. And long after the drums stopped beating, his echo still marches across the land. Title: Shaka Zulu, the warrior king who changed Africa forever. Lyric Chronicles from Exile to Empire. This is the untold story of Shaka Zulu, the legendary warrior who rose from rejection to become one of Africa's most powerful kings. In this animated series, Lyric Chronicles, we explore his painful childhood and rise to power, the military genius behind the Zulu war machine, epic battles against rival kingdoms, his complex legacy of strength, fear, and betrayal. This is not just history. It's the raw, emotional journey of a king who dared to change destiny. Subscribe for more gripping African stories, myths, and history. New episodes daily. Drop a comment. Was Shaka a visionary leader or a ruthless tyrant? Hashtag Shaka Zulu. Hashtag African history. Hashtag Lyric Chronicles. Hashtag Zulu Kingdom. Hashtag animated storytelling. Hashtag historical legends.